There's a moment that happens just before everything changes. You won't see it coming. You won't feel it arrive like a sudden lightning strike or some dramatic turning point in a movie. It's quieter than that, more subtle, more true. It arrives like you're in the middle of your day. Maybe you're driving. Maybe you're sitting alone somewhere. Maybe you're just moving through a conversation that doesn't require your full attention anymore. And in that split second, that fraction of a moment where your thinking mind goes quiet, you feel something. Not a thought, not an idea. Something underneath all of that. It's a kind of knowing, an instinct, a whisper from the part of you that never actually agreed to live small. This is May 13th, 2026. And what makes today different isn't the calendar. It's not some cosmic alignment that suddenly rewires your brain or magically solves your problems. What makes today different is that you're finally reaching the point where staying the same costs more than changing. You've been running for a long time. Not with your feet, with your mind, with your choices, with the careful construction of a life that looks safe from the outside but feels suffocating from within. You've been building walls so perfectly that you almost forgot they were there. Almost forgot that on the other side of them is something you once knew how to access. Your own instinct. But instincts don't die. They get buried. They get quiet. They get covered under layers of doubt, protective thinking, and the 1,000 small decisions you made because you were scared of something. Fear has a way of reshaping your relationship with yourself. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, be careful. Don't risk it. They might reject you. You might fail. What if you're not enough? And after a while, you stop hearing the fear as a voice. You hear it as truth. But something shifted. Somewhere in the last few days, the weight got too heavy. The confusion got too loud. The internal contradiction between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are finally cracked open enough that you could see inside it. And what you saw was this. The version of you that you've been running from. The version that knows what it wants, that moves without needing permission, that trusts itself even in uncertainty. Never actually left. It's still there. It's been waiting. Today is the day you start to remember that you don't need to find yourself. You need to stop hiding from yourself. Let me describe something very specific, and I want you to feel how much this is about you, not about anyone else. There's a pattern that runs through the lives of people who are beginning to wake up. They don't usually see it at first. It shows up as what looks like confusion, what looks like indecision, what looks like being stuck. But it's actually something much more interesting than that. It's the collision point between two different versions of you, and neither one is lying. On one side, there's the version of you that has learned how to survive. This version is careful. It watches the room before speaking. It measures its ambitions against what it thinks is realistic. It knows the rules, and even if those rules feel arbitrary, this version has learned that following them buys safety. This version isn't weak. It's actually quite intelligent. It's kept you alive. It's made sure you didn't take risks that would humiliate you or destroy you. It's the voice that says, don't be too much. Don't want too much. Don't ask for too much. And then there's another version. Deeper. Older. Less reasonable. This is the version that knows what it actually wants without needing to justify it. The version that feels things before thinking about them. The version that moves toward what calls to it, even when the logical mind can't explain why. This version doesn't ask permission. It doesn't check the room first. It doesn't diminish itself to make others comfortable. This is your instinct. Your real knowing. For years, maybe your whole life, these two versions have been in conflict. And because you couldn't actually choose between them, Because part of you understood that the careful version was protecting you, while part of you was slowly suffocating under that protection, you ended up freezing. Not moving forward, not going backward, just existing in a kind of controlled stasis that felt like thinking very hard about your life without actually living it. This is what confusion really is. It's not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's the sound of two truths colliding. It's what happens when the part of you that's trying to survive is blocking the part of you that's trying to live. And here's what's important. You've been interpreting this collision as a personal failure. You thought the confusion meant you didn't have the answers. You thought it meant you were broken, or indecisive, or uncommitted. But what if the confusion was actually a sign of something much deeper? What if it was the sound of your real instinct knocking on the door, asking you to finally let it back in? The last few days, maybe the last few weeks, you felt heavier than usual. Not physically, though that might be true too. Emotionally heavy, like you're carrying something without knowing exactly what it is or why it's gotten so dense. And the instinct has been to think harder, to analyze more, to figure it out, to solve it like it's a puzzle you haven't found the right angle on yet. But what if the heaviness wasn't something to solve? What if it was something to end? You see, the careful version of you has been working overtime. It's been holding so much, it's been managing so much, it's been preventing so much, and it's exhausted. That heaviness you feel isn't confusion. It's the weight of a self that's been trying to live a life it doesn't actually believe in anymore. The body knows this before the mind does. The instinct knows this before the thinking catches up. And that's why you've been feeling the pull towards something different, even when you couldn't name what that something is. That's why certain ideas feel magnetic to you. That's why you're watching this. That's why you're here, reading these words, because some part of you, the deepest part, the truest part, is trying to get your attention. May 13 is the day you finally listen. In ancient stories, there's always a moment where the hero sits alone. They sit in the dark. They face what they've been avoiding. And in that sitting, in that quiet, something begins to crack open. It's not dramatic, it's not loud. It's the moment before the real story begins. That's the space you're in right now. You've been moving through days that feel like they're moving in slow motion. Even when things are happening around you, even when you're doing things and saying things and showing up, there's a part of you that's been watching it all from a distance. There's a part of you that's been asking, is this it? Is this really my life? This question is the beginning of something. It's not the sign that things are falling apart. It's the sign that you're finally looking at whether things are actually working. And there's something very specific happening right now that I want you to understand about the timing. Not because the universe suddenly decided to send you a message on May 13. Not because Mercury's in retrograde or Venus is in some particular house, but because you've reached the point where you're finally ready to hear what your own wisdom has been trying to tell you for a long time. Astrologically, we're in a time where there's a lot of pressure toward alignment, toward authenticity, toward the collision between what you've been pretending is true and what you actually know is true. This isn't magic. It's just that the energetic frequency of this time is making it harder to ignore the gap between your real desires and your constructed life. The cosmic weather is no longer allowing you to comfortably stay in denial. But here's what matters more than any planetary position. You're ready. Something in you has reached its limit. The safe version of you has finally gotten so quiet that you can hear the other version underneath it. This quiet is sacred. Don't rush it. Don't try to fix it with action yet. Don't try to solve it with thinking. This is the space where real transformation begins. And it happens in silence before it happens in the world. Right now, there are things you're seeing about yourself that you couldn't see before. Not because you suddenly became smarter, but because you finally stopped defending against the truth. You finally got tired of the argument. You finally realized that the only person you were fighting was yourself. And in that exhaustion, something interesting happens. The mind gets quieter. The constant narration that's been filling every space, justifying, explaining, protecting, controlling, finally runs out of fuel. And when the mind gets quiet enough, you can hear something else. You can hear what you actually want. You can feel what you're actually called toward. You can sense the direction your real life wants to move in. This is the beginning of instinct returning. There's something I need to say directly. The version of you that you've been protecting, the careful, controlled, limited version, that's not actually you. It's a construction, a very intelligent construction, a very necessary construction at one point in your life. But it's not your fundamental nature. Your fundamental nature is something much stranger than that, much bigger, much less predictable. Think back to before you learned to be careful. I'm not talking about childhood nostalgia or some golden age thinking. I'm talking about the actual felt sense of how you moved through the world before you had reasons not to, before you understood what could hurt you, before you learned the rules. When you were small, you didn't ask permission to want things. You didn't measure your desires against what was realistic. You didn't diminish yourself to make others feel comfortable. You were quite simply alive in a more direct way. You were reactive, yes. You were uninformed, yes. You were naive about consequences, absolutely. But you were also moving on instinct. You were following what felt true without needing a logical argument for why it was true. Now, I'm not suggesting you become that again. That version of you didn't have the wisdom you've developed through living and learning and getting hurt and recovering. That version of you didn't know what you know now about how the world actually works, about your own capacity, about what matters. But here's what I am suggesting. That original quality, that directness, that aliveness, that ability to move on knowing without needing proof, that's still in you. It didn't get killed. It got buried. And the thing that buried it wasn't life experience. It wasn't reality finally catching up with your optimism. It was a decision. Your decision. A decision that made sense at the time, but that you're now paying the price for maintaining. The identity you've been defending is the identity of someone who is safe. And safety has become the highest value. Safety from rejection. Safety from failure. Safety from being seen as too much. Safety from being responsible for your own life. Safety from the consequences of actually wanting something and moving toward it. But here's the problem with that identity. It requires constant maintenance. It requires that you keep making the same small decisions over and over again. It requires that you suppress the voice that knows what it wants. It requires that you stay in conversation with people, in work, in situations that your instinct knows aren't aligned with your actual nature. And the cost of that maintenance is real. It comes in the form of heaviness, disconnection, a vague, persistent sense that you're living a life that's mostly about avoiding the wrong things instead of moving toward the right ones. This is what the last few days have been about. You finally noticed the cost. And noticing the cost is what starts to make change possible. The interesting thing is that the identity you've been defending, the careful, controlled version, it doesn't actually feel good to you anymore, does it? It used to feel like wisdom. It used to feel like maturity. It used to feel like you were finally getting your act together, being responsible, being realistic. But at some point, and I think you know exactly when this was, it started to feel like a cage. Not a safe cage. Not even a cage you built for yourself. More like a cage you inherited. More like a cage that made sense for someone else. Someone you thought you had to be, but that doesn't actually fit who you are. And the version of you that's starting to wake up, the version that can feel this clearly, that's the version that knows the cage was always optional. That's the version that's starting to remember what it felt like to move on its own authority, without asking permission first. Every person who's trying to stay small is afraid of something, and it's almost never what they think they're afraid of. You might think you're afraid of failure. You might think you're afraid of what other people will think. You might think you're afraid of not being good enough, not being ready, not having the right credentials or the right experience or the right resources. These are all real fears, and they're all, in a sense, lies. There's a deeper fear underneath all of that, a fear that barely anyone talks about because it's almost too real to put into words. It's this, what if I actually could do this? What if the thing I'm afraid I'm not capable of, I actually am capable of? What if the thing I've been telling myself is impossible is just something I haven't been willing to try yet? This is the fear that makes you feel unstable. This is the fear that's been driving the need to stay small, to stay controlled, to stay defended. Because if you admit that you could, then you become responsible for the fact that you haven't. You see, it's actually much safer to believe you can't than to admit you're choosing not to. It's much safer to tell yourself that you're not capable than to face the fact that you're choosing the safety of your cage over the uncertainty of actually living. Because once you know you can, you can't unknow it. Once you see the possibility, you can't unsee it. And that's terrifying in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. It's the terror of freedom, the terror of responsibility, the terror of knowing that your life is actually yours to shape, and that the reason it looks the way it does isn't because you had no choice, it's because you made choices that protected you from having to find out what you were really capable of. But here's what's happening right now. On May 13, you're getting tired of that protection. You're getting tired of the small life. You're getting tired of the story you've been telling yourself about why you can't. And in that tiredness, something deeper is waking up. Something that doesn't care as much about safety anymore. Something that's starting to care more about aliveness. This shift isn't comfortable. In fact, it creates a specific kind of anxiety. It's not the anxiety of uncertainty, it's the anxiety of knowing what you need to do and feeling the resistance in yourself against doing it. It's the anxiety that comes from seeing two paths clearly, the path of staying small and the path of growing into your actual capacity, and finally being tired enough of the first path that you're willing to feel the fear of the second one. And the fear is real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The fear of stepping out of the cage is legitimate. The fear of what might happen if you actually pursued what you want is not irrational. The fear that people might react badly, that you might fail, that you might discover that the thing you thought you wanted was different once you actually had it, these are all real possibilities. But here's what your instinct knows that your thinking mind hasn't caught up to yet. The fear of not stepping out of the cage is getting bigger than the fear of what's on the other side. The pain of staying is finally exceeding the pain of changing. And that's the only thing that actually makes change possible. Not motivation, not inspiration, just the simple fact that the cost of staying the same has become higher than the cost of becoming something different. This is what your instinct is trying to tell you. Not be brave, not take the risk, but something much simpler. The cage doesn't fit anymore. You've outgrown it, And staying inside it is not safer. It's just slower suffocation.